50 years of landscaping in New Mexico. A couple housekeeping notes. Restrooms are outside these doors and to the left. There's also one restroom through the reception room at the far end. Judith Phillips has some of her books for sale and can sign books. That'll be during the reception. And our chapter will have new and used books for sale, New Mexico wildflower posters, and brand new stickers, which I think many of you have gotten, designed by local artists Monica O'Keefe and Lynn Grimes. And so you can feel free to take one of those if you've given us a donation, signed up for a membership, or bought something. So, we are not charging for this event, but if you would like to help support this and other upcoming events, we can take donations by cash, check, or charge. And we would love for you to become a member of the Native Plant Society. As a member, you help to support the Society's conservation and educational projects, and you receive a fabulous quarterly newsletter. Our newsletter editor, Margaret Manash, is in the audience. The chapter has the Society has 7 chapters in New Mexico and El Paso, Texas, and so when you join, you select a chapter to join. Our chapter hosts meetings on the second Tuesdays of each month from January to May and September to November at 6:30 p.m. right down the road at Christ Lutheran Church on Arroyo Chamizo. And Tuesday night's lecture features Quinn Bain from the Albuquerque Biopark, who's going to speak about insect galls. We also have field trips and garden tours in the summer, as well as social gatherings. And our next 50th anniversary speaker event will be in collaboration with the Santa Fe Botanical Garden on August 11th. Jack Dash, who's the co-author of the new Southwest Native Plant Primer, will be presenting. And he's really an excellent speaker, and we're excited to host him here in northern New Mexico. We are filming this event. If could someone back there get Arlie to start filming? Oh, there he is. He's filming this event, and we hope to post it on the Native Plant Society website. We are an all-volunteer organization, and we haven't held a meeting this big for a long time, so I appreciate your patience. I do want to thank the event committee, Susan Levick, Arlie Kuckerberg, Don Janney, Jennifer Pedno, and Monica O'Keefe. They all have worked really hard in putting together this event, and it just would not have been possible without their ideas and assistance. So, to celebrate our 50th anniversary of the Society and of our chapter, we wanted to host something that would touch on the past and the future. Looking back at newsletters archived and indexed on the website, Susan found some interesting tidbits about the Society's focus on gardening. From the beginning, establishing more native plants in gardens has been a focus of the Society. The Society was active in establishing the Randall Davey Audubon Center Garden starting in 1977, and they helped with plantings at local schools. In 1985, the Society helped plant a native plant garden at the Folk Art Museum, and in 1997 planted demonstration gardens at the Santa Fe Community College. An article in the April 1977 issue on the establishment of an outdoor nature center at the E.J. Martinez Elementary School, though, mentions the planting, without any criticism, of a windbreak of 100 Russian olives from the State Department of Forestry. But the Society gave native plant seeds to kids to grow. An article in 2001 about selling Russian olives had Bob Pennington of Agua Fria Nursery in the anti-olive camp, with an article by Dan Miller of Blossom's Garden Center in Taos in the pro-olive camp. Tamarisk is among the plants listed in the native plant sale from 1977. An article about the benefits of drip irrigation appears in the 1977 issue. But focused more exclusively on native plants, there are numerous articles by Judith Phillips on growing and gardening with native plants that appear throughout the years. I would guess that many of us here became interested in native plants through gardening as we searched for plants that looked good and thrived in our local area, and as we sought to provide habitat for birds, butterflies, and other wildlife. Sustainable landscaping is a broader topic that includes thinking about water and energy use, in the landscape, sustainable materials, and long-term resilience of landscapes. So for those of you who are professionals in the landscape industry in the audience, I hope you will find inspiration to continue promoting sustainable landscapes to your clients, and we'll get a chance to do some networking with other professionals in the audience during the reception. Could I just have a show of hands of everyone who's in the landscape profession who's in the audience? All right. And how many of you are master gardeners out there? Wow, okay. So I just wanted you to know who you're sitting next to. And we do really encourage some networking for this event. So now to introduce our panelist and moderator. Before I moved to New Mexico from Maryland, I was really involved with sustainable landscaping initiatives in the Chesapeake Bay region. And so when I moved to New Mexico, a friend from Albuquerque gave me one of Judith Phillips' books. And that was my first introduction to what native plants might do well here in gardens. Later I met her at various plant events around the state. Judith's long involvement with the New Mexico Native Plant Society and her landscape design and installation experience made her the obvious first person to approach about participating on the panel. I met Tracy and Linda as far back as 2013 as the Santa Fe Botanical Garden was starting its new garden. Tracy and I taught sustainable landscaping classes for a couple years, and we had great fun recently driving around old neighborhoods in Santa Fe looking at home landscapes as we thought about questions for this program. Tracy has worked at several nurseries since he moved to New Mexico in the 1970s, including at Santa Fe greenhouses, and he is a certified arborist. Tracy and Linda worked together for a while at different landscape design and installation companies, and now Linda is the horticulture director at the Santa Fe Botanical Garden, where she installs and maintains an incredible array of gardens and does public education on various horticultural topics. So I was thrilled when the two of them were so enthusiastic about joining the program. Finally, we wanted to include someone currently working in commercial landscape installation and maintenance, and Linda suggested Charles Doerwald. Charles started El Toro Landscape in 1997, a company that designs, installs, and maintains both large and small landscapes in northern New Mexico. He also happens to know Judith from the landscape architecture program at UNM, where he was a student. So it's a small community in some ways. Tracy has agreed to act as moderator for today's discussion, and we hope to cover quite a few topics, but we will leave time for questions from the audience at the end. So please join me in welcoming Tracy, Judith, Linda, and Charles.
I'm going to start the questions with Judith because she and I have been in this business longest of all of us. So I'm going to ask this question to everybody. I'm going to start with Judith. Judith, how have landscaping practices, design preferences, plant and hardscaping materials changed in the last 50 years in your experience?
Yeah, I'm providing the historical perspective here. I think from a plant standpoint, I am using the same native plants that I started using 40-some years ago, and adding some from more southern and western ecosystems, but I have rotated out a lot of the exotics that I have used. It's interesting, I hardly use any of them anymore because in Albuquerque, it's just too hot for a lot of things. And last week was the Land and Water Summit in Albuquerque, and I was talking to Hunter Tenbrook there, and we were talking about all the things that, like dianthus, we don't use because it burns out in the summertime. And there are just a lot of things. Catalpas seemed to be a good idea to begin with, and not so much. And I thought it would be a great thing because it's broader leaf than desert willow, and so I thought it would be a better shade producer, but not with the problems that it has being cloned. I guess I think there's a lot less, well, I'm using a lot less gravel and a lot more wood mulch than I had in the past. But the mulch depends on the planting, and so for the really arid-adapted plants that really don't want a lot of organic matter in the soil, I still am using some gravel, but anyway, less gravel, partly because of the heat. It's just too hot to have more expanses of gravel. I think that I'm also focusing more on shrubs, both large shrubs to use as trees, medium-sized shrubs for the middle ground, and then low-growing shrubs for ground cover, fewer herbaceous plants, just because the shrubs hold up better, and they're easier to drip irrigate effectively. And I guess the other thing is now in Albuquerque, and now it's actually the New Mexico Backyard Refuge Program. It's not just the Albuquerque Backyard Refuge Program, but finally there's, in the last 10 years, we've started a real organized approach to trying to get people to consider habitat as rainwater harvesting. That's the other thing. So those are the main ways that things have shifted over time. And rainwater harvesting, I think, is just more, especially here in Santa Fe. I think you really are ahead of the game. Albuquerque just finally approved curb cuts for draining rainwater off the street to water street trees, which, anyway, so progress is being made.
Okay, Linda, you want to take it?
Does this work? Yes. I started landscaping just experientially, and I'm still doing it that way. I don't have any professional horticulture training, just time. But when I first started working with landscapers, everybody was pretty much doing pretty gardens here in Santa Fe. By the time I moved here, which was not 50 years ago, but almost 40, lawn was kind of on the way out already in Santa Fe. There were some lawns, especially in the east side of Santa Fe more, but more and more people were not putting in lawns, but they were still looking for pretty. They were still planting a lot of roses and daylilies and bearded irises and et cetera, et cetera. You all, I think we're probably speaking to the choir here today. And yes, the botanical garden does have some of those things. We don't have daylilies and irises. But I've noticed over time, I'm seeing far less of those. I'm actually seeing, Bob, you can comment on this too maybe. I think I'm seeing fewer of those things in the nurseries locally. Because I think people are just not interested as much. They're more interested in native plants and native plant design. That's changed a lot. We still have pretty trees, fruit trees, and crab apples that we use in design, but those are pretty well adapted here. I'm not seeing nearly as many big shade trees, which need a lot of water and resources and things like that. So that's one of the big changes I've seen. Also, even just in the botanical garden, which we started the process of designing in 2008 or so. It took a few years, and it was installed and finished in 2013. Even in the, 13 years now since that's gone in, we're making changes to the palette there because of we're seeing changes in the climate. It's hotter and drier. And we're also seeing, I'm sure the garden is the only place in Santa Fe that has such terrible soil. But we're replacing a lot of trees because if you don't plant your trees correctly, they have to get replaced in our soils. And I think people are starting to tweak to that. So I'm going to have Charles speak to this next, I think, because he's got the installation jobs too.
Okay. I agree about that with the trees. It seems like the practice used to be, you plant a tree and it would do great, and you walk away and give it water and it would get big, too big. But it does seem like a lot of times now these things just look good for a couple of years and then they hit the native soil and everyone panics and doesn't understand what's happening, myself included. I would also say that cost to maintain and sustain landscapes is a big factor. Everyone wants, water bills go up in the summer, and I think a lot of people notice that. And I think the more people see things like pumice wicks and some kind of, somewhat informed use of catchment and runoff, they see what a difference it makes. And even just walking around, in nature, you can see where you're like, whoa, the grass is really tall there. What's going on? Oh, there's a low point or a swale, a natural swale or something. So it does seem like we're all kind of, not we're all, but some people are noticing these things more so than they used to.
I'm going to throw in some comments. I've been doing this since 1974, so I'm going to playing the plants here. So I'm going to throw in some comments that I thought of when I thought of this question, how to answer this question, and I'll try to make it quick. I worked in Albuquerque from 74 to 86. I moved to Santa Fe in 86, ran the nursery at Santa Fe Greenhouses for 9 years, and then have done landscaping since then. So, in design, one of the things I saw was that many newcomers came here from back east, up north, Pacific Northwest, starting in the 80s. There was a big influx, and a lot of people wanted to use the plants they had back home, or designs they saw in national magazines, which led to the creation of Southwest cottage gardens. Cottage gardens were plants that would grow here. Luckily, the Xeriscape campaigns and conferences in the 80s and 90s helped create this awareness of the need to save water, as did the droughts in the early 2000s. That woke up a lot of people. And on the horizon, a design trend we're all going to have to get onto, everybody that lives in vulnerable areas, is firewise landscaping, and that's going to have a big impact. Okay, in regard to plants in the 70s and early 80s in Albuquerque, plants available were mainly the same ones used all over the country, as long as they would adapt to our soils and climate with enough inputs, i.e. water primarily. So people were using lilacs, forsythias, spireas, other spring bloomers like that you could find in Maryland. There was a real dearth of choices when it came to trees and perennials. Man, that was way limited compared to now. And there was very little awareness of native plants in Albuquerque nurseries. I lived out on the West Mesa, south end of Corrales. My soil, so to speak, was basically almost pure sand. And I lived there for a while, was working at the nursery on 4th Street. And there was this great big gray-green shrub in the backyard. I had no idea what it was. It never got watered. We never had to do anything to it. The dogs dug a hole under one side so they could lay out there in the shade. And after a couple of years, I took in a piece of it to the owner of the nursery, and I said, "What is this, and why aren't we selling it?" He's like, "God, this is a great plant." He said, that's just a native weed. Nobody buy that." That was the attitude in the 70s.
What was it?
Four-winged saltbush. But in Santa Fe, when you drive around, when we drove around looking, of course, there were lots of collected conifers used here. Blue spruce, pinyon, ponderosa. You drive around the old neighborhoods, you see a lot of those, because people could go up in the mountains and dig them up, bring them down and sell them, just like aspens. And Agua Fria Nursery started in 1975 and plants the Southwest in 1977. So people in Santa Fe had choices for native plants that we didn't in Albuquerque. The large wholesale nurseries carried very few natives until the late 80s, so couldn't get them wholesale. In the late 80s and 90s, when I was running the nursery at Santa Fe Greenhouses, that began this incredible introduction of new species and cultivars in every category, including more natives available from wholesalers. The Plant Select program started in 1997. That brought some into awareness that the wholesalers started growing. So major trends in plant introductions since the 1980s. The big thing that I saw in the 80s and 90s was they were introducing more summer blooming and longer blooming shrubs and perennials. Russian sage was introduced in the 90s because it bloomed bloomed all summer, and it was so tough and easy. They're also introducing more dwarf and compact trees, shrubs, and perennials. They figured out, oh, not everybody lives on an estate where you can have these giant trees and shrubs. Ornamental grasses took off. If you're paying attention, that happened big time. And the growth of internet plant sales. David Salmon introduced many Western natives and hybrids through high country gardens, and now there's a ton of new suppliers out there. And more natives have become available as the demand increased and growers learned how to grow them. Not all natives like to grow in pots, huh, Judith? In the realm of hardscape materials, when I was in Albuquerque, guess what people used for weed control? Hard black plastic. Not hard, but just solid black plastic. You know, you can imagine what that did for the soil. The only good thing about it was over time it'd crack and let in a little bit of water. Well, that was replaced by woven weed barrier, which turns out to be just about as bad. So there you go. Drip irrigation has become standard. Like Zoe mentioned, that was mentioned in the 70s. Well, now it's the standard. And there are new smart timers and new innovations in irrigation which are helping to make it easier to use. Lawns have been replaced by masses of gravel, darn near everywhere, and that's some good and bad points to that. There have been many better materials introduced since the mid-80s. Real compost. We didn't have real compost to sell in the 70s and early 80s. Better organic mulches, natural and organic fertilizers. There was blood meal and bone meal in the 70s. That was it. That's what you find in the nursery. And low-impact pesticides. Not only organic pesticides, which weren't on the market when I was down there in the 70s, but low-impact pesticides. And a biggie that's going to really, really be critical in the future. Water harvesting materials and strategies are now easy to come by. They weren't. Okay, so those are some other historical notes about changes in that particular group. Okay, Charles, you're going to get the next one. Are you ready? What current landscaping practices and strategies are you using for dealing with changes in water, climate, pests and diseases, and fire hazards? Second part of that, do you find that clients and the public are more accepting of sustainable practices?
Yes and yes. I mean, a lot of us have gotten letters from our homeowners insurance getting our attention about the fire risk and fire maps and things like that. And they're forced to, again, just by economics. I do think that our conception of what is pretty or our aesthetic has changed a lot. Where when you see a garden that's full of water-thirsty, sort of outdated plant palette, it's maybe not as attractive as one that's more informed or innovative with different natives and different techniques and things that maybe I hadn't considered before. And even beyond that, it seems like a lot of times, a lot of landscapes, on new construction, on new houses, we work mostly on houses, the main intention is to just kind of get it almost to like an ideal state of revegetation, renaturalized, healthier, a little bit more well executed, but it's almost trying to fix what was disrupted when the construction happened. So those are my first thoughts on that.
Do you find more people asking for natives and these strategies, or do you basically educate your clients why they should be doing this, or both?
Probably both, and I don't work alone. I work with other designers, and you have to listen to your customers. So it seems to be more collaborative, I would say. And I'm not going to say that sometimes, I don't bend the rules for special people, but and I don't really have hard and fast rules. It's just what will work is sort of the main goal. So.
Charles and I collaborated on a project, less than a quarter mile from here at the United Church of Santa Fe. It's on the corner of St. Michael's and Arroyo Chamiso. We try to do mostly natives or really well-adapted plants in a whole sort of walking area around there. And then there's a streetscape on St. Michael's that's all natives except for a couple blue mist spirea, I think. Not necessarily Santa Fe native, but Southwest natives anyway. And it's absolutely stunning. And I just want to put a plug in for Charles that they do the best landscape maintenance with natives that I've ever seen. So they're very sensitive, all these guys are, and they're willing to let me lecture them too. And that's a really, really big part of the change in gardens and landscaping and all of us, because we have to be able to work with the contractors. We're all educated, not everybody is. Some people have to have a profit motive because they have to make a living, and so we need to be the people educating those folks. Charles's crew is already there, but there's more work to do in that area.
Judith,
Lay it out.
Maintenance is a big issue. And actually one of the really basic things that I see going wrong is that people water too often and not deeply enough. And they never shift from the first few months of getting plants starting to root in the ground to when they should be progressively rooting more deeply, and the timer is still coming on 3 times a week, and for drip irrigation for 15 minutes. Well, anyway, it's really frustrating to. And one of the big challenges, though, is getting when we have meetings and various educational programs, the people who are already, it's like we're preaching to the choir. The people who need to hear the news, it's not news anymore, but the people who who it would be news to, aren't there. And so how do we get those people to the table or to the rainwater harvesting basin? There are a lot of frustration, and then people, the contractors who just.
We forgot to say timber folks.
Oh yeah, good question. I forgot what it was. Oh, the contractors, but what about them? The pruning that's done. A lot of it totally unnecessary, and wrong. Yeah, and things like chamiso shouldn't be irrigated after the first year it's in the ground, and they can turn into these monstrosities. And then anyway, there's just so many things that, and it's not even fine tuning; it's rough tuning that we need to do to get people to get with the program.
What do you do about water use on your landscapes besides getting people to irrigate properly? Are you using pumice wicks? Are you using water collection?
Soil sponges, actually, we're using, and I prefer those to pumice wicks because
Explain what a soil sponge
a
is.
soil sponge is just, you dig a hole in the ground and you backfill, and the hole can be like about the size of a 5-gallon container, and you backfill with a combination of living compost, shredded wood, and some pumice that provides the aeration. And the good thing about volcanic rock is that it has air, but it also absorbs water, and so it's the perfect. So it's essentially a French drain, but with living material in it. And I use that mostly for like orchard trees or big shade trees, and we use it a lot to help recover trees that are declining. It's amazing how quickly, the way it works is that the wood is in the mix to feed the compost, and then the compost starts, the mycorrhiza in the compost starts moving out into the surrounding soil, and plant roots can attach to it, and they'll extend the root system of the plants tremendously. And so in this climate, that's exactly what you want to happen. So they're sort of like a in-ground cistern that is also a very microbially rich way of supporting the plants rather than with chemical fertilizers or whatever.
For those of you who are not 100% familiar with this technique, would you then put a dripper
Yes.
in that area?
Yes.
Or maybe even a 2-gallon, a higher one, so that area stays moist and the microbes can keep active?
Well, and I on the plants that I do years ago, probably 30 years ago now, I realized that the contractors know how to move the water around. They know how to get water where it needs to go. They don't know how much goes where. And so I started specifying per plant, the flow rate of the emitter and the number of emitters per plant depending on the size of the plant and the needs of the plant. And a long time ago, I quit using anything smaller than a 2-gallon-an-hour emitter because they don't plug, and so you don't. So yeah, the sponges need to have to keep them active. They need to microbially. They need to have an emitter on them because we just have too long a dry period in between rainfall. But you can use those to actually make the soil in basins more permeable, so that the water doesn't stand in a rainwater basin, because there's a 96-hour rule, and you're supposed to, they consider it a taking of state-owned water if you have water standing for more than 36 hours, not 36, 96. And it's also a mosquito problem. So getting the water in the soil, stored in the soil, is a much better way of going then. And the thing about the sponges that's great, you can use wicks too. You can fill wicks with the same material, but sponges you can spot here and there, and so you're not cutting into existing tree roots. And it's a really very flexible technique, I guess.
Charles, you have anything to add to that?
Do you have a detail for that we can all?
Yes, and it's solutions. It's a solutions detail, and then and I'll email it to you. But also, the highway department has a detail that's. I mean, they have they use augers, and you dig a hole. It's not so for homeowners. I don't But anyway, if you use augers for planting too, you can punch holes for the sponges when you're planting. The thing I don't like about auger drilled holes is that unless the sides of the hole is roughed up, it really becomes a pot in the ground. And a lot of times people just don't really think about that, especially in clay soil. You wind up with, you've got a potted plant there.
like the Botanic Garden, exactly. We didn't know when I first started working with the designer there that the Botanic Garden is sitting on caliche. And it's like, oh my God, we're doing a Botanic Garden here? It's been a real challenge. Okay, and everybody's going to have to deal with Firewise landscaping in the future, and that ain't going to be fun. Okay, Linda, from your experience, what are some of the current successes and challenges of landscaping, whether they emerge from people's preferences, availability of materials, lack of skilled labor, you can answer that one too, Charles, climatic uncertainty and droughts, and laws and regulations?
I think you just got them all. I want to talk about successes first, actually, because there are quite a few, especially here in and around Santa Fe. We're ahead of the game. We might not be on the game 100% yet, but I just came from a long trip to the the Front Range area, and they're just starting to replace lawns with gravel there. That's a big step forward, but you can get further than that. We're also not as hot this summer as we are yet. So I think one really big thing is there's a whole lot more people, including probably everybody in here, that are interested in gardening. Whatever that means. It's pots on your apartment balcony, or it's your 5-acre estate, or whatever you've got. And if you can't physically garden, I think more people are educating themselves and their family and friends about, how to help them garden. I mean, their maintenance people, how to help them garden. Maybe partly due to COVID. I know there was a big upsurge in working at home during COVID, but I think it's been going on longer than that. Partly in Santa Fe, because we've had such great nurseries here. Aren't we lucky? I mean, my gosh. And they've been spending a lot of time educating us all too. We also have, the Native Plant Society has been active for a long time, 50 years here. Master gardeners are really up their game too, with especially their SNAP program. The Santa Fe Public Garden, the Santa Fe Botanical Garden, we're just 13 years old, and it's wonderful to have that public resource. But there's other places too, like I think Tracy said, the community college. There's all sorts of places where we can really see great landscaping that uses natives, adapted plants, and are water-wise. A lot of places are still using too much water, but we're doing better than most. I think there's also great conferences if you want to go one step further, and this is especially for the professionals in the room. The Think Trees conference that just happened, the Land and Water Summit, ProGreen maybe not so much in Colorado, but there's a lot of smaller and larger conferences. Nonprofits like, I hope you all know about the Xerces Society. They do amazing work here and all over. And a lot of those places, because there's more people getting involved with those great groups. So those are big successes for us. There's also great other examples of public landscaping in Santa Fe. Are you all aware of the landscaping that happened down on Water Street? Is it Water Street? In downtown Santa Fe, along the river? That I think Alameda. With curb cuts and beautiful stonework and appropriate plantings. They've done quite a lot now. I think it's a really great example of how public gardening can be better for the public and for the gardens. And the Xerces Society and a lot of other people also helped us recognize there's more to life than us and our gardens. There's all that other stuff that lives in the world, from way down in the soil to soil level, to living on and around the plants, to up in the sky. So that's a really big success. I think we're all much more aware of that. And that's part of the change of the aesthetic from what's pretty to what's beautiful, if you want to put it that way. So beauty involves all of it, all the creatures, all the people. What else? I brought a copy of this month's Home Real Estate magazine. Because there's a great article in here called One Water, Small Actions, Lasting Impact. They've been doing great articles about water and gardening in this real estate magazine for a decade or more. This is a particularly good one. It talks about One Water. It's all the same water resource that we all have to pay attention to. One thing I used to get a lot in landscaping was people, for example, in Suzuki, where I live, that said, well, I have to use all my water, and they had a lot because it was pre-basin allocation. Because otherwise they're going to take it away from me. You're just taking it away from everybody else if that's your attitude. So you live right and you have to garden right as well. But I think fewer and fewer people have that attitude now. There's also, thanks to Bob, thanks to Gail, other people, there's much greater availability of drop tolerant and native plants than there used to be. Like Tracy said 30 and 40 years ago, Bob and Gail had those plants, but pretty much nobody else did. So we're really lucky in that. Native plants are extremely hard to grow in black plastic pots, and they usually take longer than Mainite salvia and all the yarrows that are out there. But so you have to have patience. But we're kind of learning that too. Let's see. And I think the greater public understanding of not using pesticides anymore. It's not just about the insects, it's about all of us. So, let's see. As to the challenges, we don't want to dwell too much on the water stuff because I think you all know all about what's going on there. an onslaught of regulation that seems like it's getting better about how to landscape, how to use your water, that kind of things. But there's not a lot of follow-up with government. So for example, a lot of people in the neighborhood where I live have roof water catchment systems that put the water in a cistern underground. Well, great idea, right? But you know what? It takes a lot of work to get it from there into your landscape. Most people that I know don't have the money or the interest, so it just goes out their overflow drain. And they have these great green, going down into their arroyos that are full of weeds and grasses because they're not using their caught roof water. I hope more contractors learn how to do that over time. Charles is good at it. It's expensive to have it done right, and it has to be maintained. Those are some of the other challenges. All that watering stuff, irrigation, using water with the watering wand. It's all expensive and hard to maintain. So we just have to include that in our personal and commercial budgeting as we go forward if we want to have plants, I think. Other challenges. Plants are expensive, irrigation expensive, plants are getting more expensive. Even wholesale plants now cost more than we were buying in retail maybe, 6 or 8 years ago. They've just gone up astronomically. But, we have fewer people around to help take care of those plants, really. So I'm not going to go into that discussion, but you'll know what I'm talking about. Let's see, other challenges. Well, the real estate sector can still be a challenge. Up until recently, there were showing big spreads of green lawns and, houses with juniper landscaping and nothing else in a lot of home magazines. We're seeing less of that now, but that's still a challenge. I've written a few letters to the editor about that. It's like, we need to move beyond aspens and lawn, even though most of us are doing it. Let's see. I think that might just about cover. There's a lot more. We all know about some of the challenges. But I did want to finish my talk about this with one thing, which is one of the great successes with climate change, with water, with gardening, is that we're all more aware of everything and everybody now. And I think we can't get much further than where we are now on a big scale without spirit coming into it. And you as gardeners probably understand this. I don't want to go into this at great depth, but you have to understand the glory of life if you're a gardener. There's life all around us. And a lot of you probably know this quote already, but I'm going to quote this with Rumi before I finish this part, which is, "Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground." Gardeners know all about that.
Thanks, Linda. That was inspiring. One thing, when you were talking about successes, I think in a way we're fortunate that we live in such a challenging landscape with wind and drought and regulation and all of the challenges that we have here, because I think it forces us to look more closely at our landscape and what our intention is and what works and doesn't work. And I think that adds a level of information to it. If it was easy, I guess we'd all be doing it. Yeah. And I think that informs how people approach landscape, and I think that it's culturally, I think a lot of people are seeing it in other aspects of their life around diet and spirituality and lifestyle and all of those things. And I don't know much more about it, but that's just my sense on that. One challenge, I think, is that you can't garden fast. It's hard to garden fast. Fast gardening, I'm going to try it this summer. But it's hard to do that. And I think doing these things in a sensitive environment and a sensitive landscape and doing it with a sense of sensitivity is hard to do, and it's time consuming, and it's hard to do at scale. And I've given up on scaling. much more, I find. So so it's not, I feel fortunate that I've kept the same people, and we have forgotten many of the things that we've learned, and we're still learning. I mean, that's part of the reason I wanted to do this, was because it is labor intensive, and it requires a commitment, and it also requires a tolerance for discomfort and failure and experimentation, and some of those things. So, I think you just have to do your best. And I also think there's a lot of value in the activity itself. I think it's very grounding, and I think it's very therapeutic and healthy. And like you said, it's great when people have, plants in cans, on their fence. And, there's obviously a strong connection to that activity and value there. So, yeah, that's my point.
Judith.
There's no such thing as failure in gardening. There's learning experiences. And I'm the queen. And the other quote that I really love is Mac Griswold calls gardening the slowest of the performing arts, which is just perfect, because that's exactly what it is.
What about successes that you have had? We can talk about that a little bit.
I think I'm really fortunate because of the books. Most of the people who seek me out know what I'm about, and so I don't have to convince them of anything. And that was kind of an unintended consequence. I write books because I want people to know this stuff, and so educating people really works, but not quickly enough, and not enough people. Good ideas seem to spread through neighborhoods too. I mean, Gayfeather is a really beautiful plant for a really brief period of time in the fall. But I've had, people tell me that they met more of their neighbors when the gayfeather was blooming than, because people will come and ring the doorbell and say, "What is that?" The other good thing I'm finding with young people now is they are not nearly as afraid of trying to grow things from seed as, and so there's, like in the landscape architecture program at UNM, I never talked about seed because I had this idea that the students wouldn't be interested, and anyway, there's a whole class night devoted to revegetation, seeding, and that I think is a really important thing, because in terms of climate change, if a plant is rooted in the ground without having its root system ever interrupted, it's going to be a whole lot more resilient than if it's transplanted. No matter the quality of the plant, or it's just true that plants grown from seed on site are going to be stronger and more resilient. And so I think that's a plus. The kind of downside of that is there's, because of the big fires, and seed availability is becoming an issue. So, but at least the desire is there, and the action follows the desire. So, yeah.
Okay, so that's a nice segue into the last question on our list for all of you. What are the most effective ways to help landscape professionals, gardeners, and homeowners understand and adopt sustainable design, planting, and maintenance practices given the current and likely future environmental conditions? So you can build on that and we'll go on.
I think homeowners is easy. People see things working well, and they, why wouldn't they continue doing it?
But if they don't see it, and they come from elsewhere, lots of times they have very different ideas.
Well, the people that I work with, again, I'm lucky. I'm really fortunate in the people that I deal with. Well, and you can point to other successful landscapes as far as coaching people. And actually, one of my former students calls herself a landscape coach, and I think that's terrific. And she's doing, she's teaching people is what we all have to do, and everybody in this room has to do that, because you all know more than you think you do, and you all know people who don't know as much as you do. And so, crusade.
Wait,
Yeah.
my personal way about me isn't always the most tactful and gentle, but really, that is the best way to make change. As we all have heard in political discussions nowadays, you can't tell someone you're wrong. You have to say, here's how I believe, what do you believe, where can we meet somewhere in the middle? And I've had that experience working with not all, but a few different landscaping contractors, especially when I'm able to work with the guys with their hands in the dirt. I'll get down on the ground with them and say, this is how I'd really like to see the tree planted. And then they ask why. People aren't dumb. They want to know why you're doing this. It might take a little longer, so their boss might not be so happy with how long it took to plant that tree, but they won't have to come and replace it in 3 years because it didn't get planted too deep. So it really does take a gentle approach to that education. That being said, as I said before, and I think Tracy alluded to, the big contractors and the big developers are really hard not to crack. Tracy spent a lot of time, I think, having people replant trees in certain large developments in Santa Fe because they just went through and planted everything the way they were used to, which wasn't the correct way to do it. And so it's a good question. I don't know exactly what the answer is. How do we make that change? I think a lot of it depends on more and more of the people in the profession, those of you who said you were in it here, working with your crews and working with your clients to really make that difference. So.
And I think when you see successful, sustainable native landscapes, it's very compelling. And we talked about different examples of that around town, and the Botanic Garden, I think, really helps inform a lot of people about what is possible in New Mexico, especially when they're new to New Mexico and they don't know the place. I think that's good. And I may be wrong here, but I think social media helps spread the word about different practices and examples of successful landscapes and practices and things like that. And on my Instagram feed, a third of it or more is landscape and gardens and stuff, probably because that's what I click on. And it's helpful to see. And it's also helpful to see different sustainable landscapes in other places and how some of those practices are, things that work. I mean, things that work in the Netherlands are pretty beautiful, and I wouldn't recommend it, but I do think that you can get some good examples that way.
One of the things that I used to do landscape classes, general landscape classes, primarily aimed at newcomers. And so I would tell them about how things are changing here. And then I would say, go down to Albuquerque and drive around and see how many nice big healthy aspens you see. All these other things that we know are going away in the future. I'd say, we're headed towards an Albuquerque climate. Dig that, go see what's going on there and what works. Here's another wake-up call that I thought, wow, that's interesting. A friend of mine who is a landscape architect here told me that somebody from the city, I think from the land use department possibly, had come and talked to their company and told them that within the next 10 years, the city wants to set it up so you can't use potable water on the landscape. Think about that. Think what that will mean to gardens here. So, time to think about water harvesting, gray water, all these other ways to extend the water that doesn't come from the city. Anyway, we have a lot to learn and a lot to do, and I want to thank all of you for coming and helping us start to think that way.
So we do want to take audience questions. I'm going to see if this microphone will turn on. Hello?
When is this one?
I think we're
Oh, you
okay.
gotta take that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, any questions? Okay. You're easy to
Bob
reach.
Pennington promised good questions.
Yeah. Judith, I was wondering if it was in your new book that the sponge, the source sponge was available to look at.
I actually put it in the Los Poblanos book, which is the newest, but I'm working on a revision of Growing the Southwest Garden, and I'm going to take out the whole gallery section and replace it with all climate strategies. And definitely, I got permission from Jim Brooks and Michael and Michael Young. They did the original graphic to reuse the graphic there.
Thank you.
Back here.
We've got one all the way in the back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name's Dodie, and I've been in landscaping for 35 years here in Santa Fe. Something that I've noticed about the fire-wise situation is that a lot of my clients, one especially, they're being required to remove 5 feet from the house. The only options they're given are gravel, flagstone, or concrete, or boulders. And I live up in Cañada de los Alamos, so my neighbors have been very active contesting the thinning of the forest and the way that they're going about that. So I'm just, I'm curious what your thoughts and opinions on that are. I just feel like I was reading an article from California about the fires there and how they were trying to make it a statewide law to, keep 5 feet from the house unlandscaped. And there were some people doing more studies and showing that some of the conifers and some of the aspens, some of the deciduous trees actually protected houses in certain areas, like it's the glowing embers more that were catching the houses on fire, but there were places, like if you look at the aerial photos, that there's still a lot of vegetation alive after those fires, and that just more study needs to be done before these blanket policies are imposed, and then it's going to really devastate our industry, I think. If we can't, a silver with nothing, taking out all those trees. My client spent $40,000 removing trees, and it's so much hotter. And it was a beautiful garden, and it's just hard. Curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. A couple of things. I read all of the reports on the fires. The LA fires were really kind of a shock because it's an urban area, and like one of the recommendations they were making is just don't run wood fencing up to the house, which that's a no-brainer, but you don't think about it if you don't. And I don't think that 5-foot barrier is so bad, because if you actually plant a shrub that spreads 3 feet wide right on that 5-foot line, and you can kind of mix it up so that it isn't this, make it not look like a hard line. I don't think that's such an issue design-wise, but also a lot of the reports were saying that the plants that were hydrated were resilient across the board, and the plants that were, just kind of hanging in there in drought were much more flammable. So, a lot of that is just really common sense.
Yeah, I think insurance and governmental regulations about fire escaping are pretty knee-jerk at this point. They don't want. But I think along with educating contractors and developers, that's another thing we all have to work on. My sister lives about a half mile from where the fires ended in Louisville, Colorado, a couple winters ago. It was the day before New Year's. Weird time to have fires up there. And Louisville's response to that was to rebuild everything the way it was before, but nobody's allowed to plant any junipers of any sort anywhere on their property now, which seems a little over the top to me. Junipers are flammable because of their resins, but I don't know if they're more so than any other plants. There's a whole lot of landscaping that can be done that's not very flammable, that's low, and I encourage everybody to do some of that near their houses so then we can have examples. Like, do that and then set your house on fire and see what more Manzanitas and cactuses especially.
Well, of course I got questions. So the first observation was I did go to that Go Green that was mentioned, and they had 2 sessions on climate change and adaptation. And the only thing in those 2 sessions that I thought was really instructive was the climatologist from Colorado State who graphed, the changes over the last 150 years. And we've had droughts over that time in this part of the country, perhaps more severe than what we're having now. But the other part of that is that there's a gradual climb in temperature. So that, for instance, last summer in Santa Fe was one of the wettest we've had, I can remember.
Yeah.
And yeah, it still seemed dry just because on average the temperature was higher. So that's part of what we have to put into that plant selection. And I know Judith mentioned that with Tracy, with trees in Albuquerque, the ones that used to grow just don't grow anymore, especially along the streets because the temperature is crazy. And the other one, I suppose, is directed more at Judith than anybody else. But of those things that you recommended, those many years ago, in Albuquerque, what do you not recommend anymore? And the other second half of that is those things that used to be maybe marginal in Albuquerque should now work in Santa Fe. A perfect example is desert willow. 50 years ago, desert willow in Santa Fe was an herbaceous plant.
Santa Fe is now warmer than the climate of Albuquerque when I first moved to Albuquerque and started working. And partly that's just all the paving and, it's a heat island, not just climate change. So the one thing compounds the other. And you're absolutely right. The transpiration rate is much higher now, which is why we want to avoid gravel mulches. One of the things people don't consider is that the pores on the plant leaf that transpire moisture on the bottom side of the leaf. So you put a sheet of gravel to heat up underneath, bouncing heat up into the tree, and then the tree takes more water. Anyway, I guess for plant examples, I never really used that many eastern redbud before, but now we have Oklahoma redbud, and we have redbuds with leathery leaves that are much more resistant to higher transpiration rates than, so sometimes it's just a different species in the same genus that we're talking about. I used to use curleaf mountain mahogany for screening. Actually, when we had the beetle devastation and people lost so many pinion in, especially up here, I started using curl-leaf mountain mahogany to replace them because they're not susceptible to the, anyway. But now, in Albuquerque anyway, they always were relatively slow growing. They're really slow growing because of the heat, and Arizona rosewood is a same rose family, but it's faster growing. It sort of thrives in the heat, and it's amazing for a broadleaf evergreen. It really wants to be in the wind. It is a much better plant if it's being buffered by, beaten on actually by the wind than it is if it's in a more controlled space. So mostly it's the little stuff that I have reduced. It's ridiculous to try and grow creeping thyme. You might as well just set fire to it, and it's just sad, and I just think, can't you hear them screaming? It's like,
We're taking out a whole lot of time at the Botanical Garden this spring.
I think we've got time for one more question. Yes.
Before the question about firewhite, or the comment about firewhites, that was my question. I'm actually involved in a national group related to bird conservation. And we are, with all the threats, we've lost 3 billion birds. Every day we get a new report on the loss, and that's just part of the biodiversity crisis that we're in. But we are now prioritizing this whole push in the western U.S. for firewhites, for these one-size-fits-all, but they don't, because they're not localized to the habitat and the conditions of all the areas. And community wildfire protection plans, which don't even consider birds, bees, pollinators, wildlife, anything at all is not on the checkbox on there. So we are coming together to develop some bird-friendly firewise sorts of things. But our audience is all of the fire people that come out and give these prescriptive, always after a fire somewhere else that may or may not be relevant to our conditions, but creates a lot of fear. And we're trying, so we would love to engage with the native plant folks to kind of help us build that. It's basically making a case saying why it matters, why it's important before these, everybody must and becomes a law situation, which would be very upsetting and very detrimental.
One of the things that's being used that I think is great is our goats for brush control, because you're supporting the goats, but you're also, it's a really low impact way of doing brush control. It doesn't compact the soil. So some of the subdivisions in Albuquerque that are in the foothills are using goats to thin out the vegetation, and they're using, actually in the bosque too, they were using the goats for brush control. And there are so many good ideas out there that it's really good to actually play off of one thing. And one thing, actually 2 things. Nolina, beargrass. I had firefighters in Silver City tell me this probably 15 years ago, not to plant Nolina near buildings because they said that's this, when they're working around Silver City, there's a lot of Nolina native in the, and they said that the plant burns down and there are these hot pockets of hot oil in the soil from the fire. And when they're running along and get your foot stuck in one of those things, it's not a pleasant experience for the firefighters. So, that was something that's, is embedded in my brain that so hopefully I've managed to embed it in all your brains too. But I thought just that, talking to people who are on the ground actually dealing with things. The other thing is that construction-wise, one of the big things about fire in houses are the vents in the houses, and they can be made to not suck the embers into the house. So building the house exactly the same, and then taking out all the vegetation and making it even hotter is, yeah, it's just short-sighted.
I would add to that, because, yeah, I had to do some research on firewise landscaping, and it really is a two-pronged thing. Houses should be built more fire resistant, instead of saying, well, it's all the fault of the landscape, get rid of the landscape. You know, that's nonsense. So that whole approach, I would urge you and anybody else who's working with developing a logical firewise approach to landscaping to put it together now for our area. The city is working on a firewise landscaping approach. Being the city of Santa Fe, I was told it could take a couple of years for this to happen, to come out. Also, the state has somebody working on this, and they said it should be done within a year. So before the authorities tell us what we can and can't do, we should be working on a sane approach to doing it here. So,
Okay, so I want to thank everyone for coming, and I hope that you'll join us for the reception in the other room to continue all these great conversations. But I want to thank our speakers.